In the bustling city of Lagos, where the hum of traffic mingled with the cries of street vendors, the contrast between wealth and poverty was as vivid as the midday sun. Skyscrapers, glistening in glass and steel, towered over mud-wall houses, their tin roofs rattling under the weight of the afternoon heat. This was a city of dreams and survival, where hope and despair often danced together in the same market square. Among the many stories of ambition, love, and betrayal that unfolded here every day, one stood out, one that began not in the lap of luxury, but in the shadows of society. Ayodele Adeyemi was the youngest son of one of Lagos' wealthiest tycoons. His family name carried weight, respect, and a certain fear. The Adeyemi fortune spanned real estate, import-export businesses, and a myriad of enterprises that stretched even beyond the borders of Nigeria. Yet despite the privilege, Ayodele felt an emptiness gnawing at his heart, a void that no wealth, no mansion, no luxury car could ever fill. He had seen countless women vying for his attention, flattering him with words that smelled of silver and gold. But he wondered, often in silent desperation, who would truly love him for himself and not for the name he carried. One humid afternoon, as Ayodele watched the city from the terrace of his family's high-rise, he made a decision that would change his life forever. He would disguise himself as one of the countless beggars who roamed the streets, those whose lives were a daily struggle between hunger and survival. He would walk among them, live among them, and test the hearts of women, not for the wealth that followed him like a shadow, but for the possibility of true love. Ayodele's preparation was meticulous. He traded his tailored suits for tattered clothes, dirted his skin with a mix of ash and dust, and cut his hair unevenly so that it appeared unkempt. He learned the art of begging, studied the rhythms of the streets, and even practiced how to bow and stretch out his hands without appearing awkward. When he finally stepped into the streets as a man no one would recognize, he felt a strange mix of liberation and fear. The first days were harsh. He felt the hunger bite at his stomach, the sun burn his back, and the cold of the nights pierce his bones. He slept under bridges, in abandoned stalls, and once, for an entire night, in a church courtyard a priest had left a few mats for the homeless. The city, which had always been a playground for him, became a labyrinth of challenges and tests of endurance. He saw people pass by without a glance, sometimes tossing coins with disdain, sometimes throwing stones as if he were an animal intruding on their path. It was during one of these evenings, as the golden sun melted into the horizon and painted the streets with orange and red hues, that he first saw her. She moved with a quiet grace, carrying a small basket of food that she had just prepared from the little she had. Her clothes were simple, modest, patched at the elbows and knees, yet they held an elegance that was natural and unpretentious. Her hair was braided in intricate patterns, a style passed down by her grandmother, and her eyes shone with a warmth that seemed to pierce through the grime and sorrow of the city streets. Her name was Amara. She was an orphan, raised by her grandmother in a small compound on the outskirts of the city. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 5, leaving her in the care of her elderly grandmother, who had since passed away, leaving Amara to navigate the world with nothing but her wits, her courage, and her kindness. Despite her hardships, she never allowed bitterness to take root in her heart. She sold vegetables in the market, washed clothes for the wealthier families, and occasionally prepared small meals for the street children who roamed the alleys. The day Ayodele approached her, disguised in rags and with a stomach gnawing with hunger, she had just finished preparing a small portion of yam and beans wrapped in plantain leaves. He knelt before her, hands outstretched, eyes pleading. She looked at him for a moment, her gaze steady and unjudging. "Take this," she said softly, breaking off a piece of yam and offering it to him with a smile that was both gentle and full of courage. "Eat before it gets cold." Ayodele felt a jolt through his chest. Here was a woman who saw him, not the disguise, not the dirt, not the tattered clothes. She saw a human being, a soul in need, and without hesitation, she offered what little she had. He wanted to speak, to explain, to tell her who he really was, but he remained silent, letting the moment linger, savoring the purity of her act. Days turned into weeks, and Ayodele continued his disguised visits. He observed her closely, learning her routines, her struggles, her small joys. She cared for the elderly in her neighborhood, shared water with children playing in the dusty lanes, and always had a word of encouragement for anyone who seemed weary or defeated. There were moments when he saw the world's harshness reflected in her eyes, the days when the market was cruel, when men shouted at her for a misplaced coin, when she had to work under the scorching sun with barely enough water to drink. But even in those moments, she never lost her kindness, her generosity, her capacity to love. Ayadil, in turn, shared small stories of his own life, carefully crafted lives of a boy who had lost his family and wandered the city in search of work and shelter. She listened, nodded, and often shared her own struggles, her own little victories. A bond began to form, rooted not in wealth or pretense, but in empathy, trust, and genuine affection. It was not all idyllic. There were days when the city's harsh realities intruded. A gang of local boys tried to snatch the little money he had earned, and Amara had to step in, her voice fierce and unyielding, standing up for him despite knowing little about him. On another day, a corrupt officer accused him of theft, and she argued with such tenacity that he was released, her courage and moral clarity leaving him in awe. Amara, unaware of his true identity, saw him as a fellow struggler, someone who shared the pain and joys of her own life. And Ayadil, in turn, saw a woman whose spirit could not be broken by life's hardships, whose heart remained open even in the face of suffering. He had sought a test of love, and in her actions, her small gestures, and her unwavering kindness, he found the answer he had been searching for. Yet, the city of Lagos, as vibrant as it was, had its own way of testing patience and heart. Ayadil knew that one day, his truth would have to be revealed. He had to balance the desire to see her continue loving him, without the weight of wealth in the background, and the inevitable revelation that could shatter the fragile trust that had begun to grow. And even as he pondered this, he could not help but be drawn to her laughter, her resilience, and the quiet strength that marked every step she took. The first month of their acquaintance passed like a dream, a blend of sun-scorched days and lantern-lit nights. Ayadil began to understand the rhythm of her life, the delicate balance she maintained between survival and kindness. He began to fall, not for her beauty, though she was undeniably lovely, but for the depth of her character, the unspoken courage, and the way she made the world feel less cruel, if only for a moment. Then came the day when a sudden illness struck her, a fever that had been brewing silently through sleepless nights and overworked days forced her to collapse in the market. Ayadil, helpless in his disguise, carried her to a nearby clinic, lied about their relationship to ensure she received proper care. As she lay on the cot, pale but alive, he held her hand, feeling an overwhelming sense of helplessness and an unspoken promise forming in his heart. "You're stronger than you think," he whispered, afraid to reveal the storm of emotions that churned inside him. She opened her eyes weakly, smiled faintly, and murmured, "We survive because we must, but sometimes it's the small acts of love that keep us going." It was a sentiment that would echo in Ayadil's heart long after the fever broke, a reminder that true love was not a product of wealth or status, but compassion, courage, and the willingness to see another's humanity. And so, in the crowded streets of Lagos, amidst the cries of hawkers, the laughter of children, and the silent prayers of those struggling to survive, a bond formed, a bond that neither money, nor deception, nor the harshness of life could easily break. For Ayadil Adeyemi, the test of love had begun not in mansions or boardrooms, but in the humble act of an orphan girl named Amara, who offered food to a stranger and, unknowingly, opened the door to a love that would change both their lives forever. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Ayadil, still in his beggar disguise, grew more entwined with Amara's life. He followed her quietly through the bustling streets, alleyways, and dusty market lanes, observing the rhythm of her existence. The city itself seemed alive, a living, breathing entity that shaped her days as much as she shaped it with her kindness. Vendors shouted the prices of yams, tomatoes, and gari. Children ran barefoot on the cracked concrete, weaving between cars and bicycles. The air smelled of fried plantains, burning charcoal, and occasional fragrant incense from a distant shrine. Amara's home was a small compound on the city's edge, where the red clay walls had begun to crumble under years of sun and rain. The compound's central courtyard was her sanctuary, where she would wash clothes on sunny days, feed the stray cats, and sit under the mango tree, peeling yam and humming old lullabies taught by her grandmother. Ayadil had learned these routines as he shadowed her life. It was during these quiet, intimate moments that he began to understand her spirit. The resilience that refused to bend, the generosity that never asked for repayment, and the courage to smile even when the world seemed determined to crush her. Yet, despite the intimacy that had developed, Ayadil knew he had to keep the truth hidden. He could not risk revealing his identity too soon. The tension of the secret, however, made each encounter more thrilling and dangerous. Every smile from Amara, every touch of her hand, was a reminder of the fragile balance he had constructed. One slip, one careless word, and the trust he had so carefully built could vanish forever. One afternoon, as the rain poured in thick, silver sheets over the city, he saw Amara struggling to carry a basket of soaked vegetables from the market. Her thin cloth shoes squelched with mud, and her hair was plastered to her forehead. Without thinking, he rushed to help, lifting the basket with an effort that left him breathless. "Thank you," she said, her voice warm despite the rain, her eyes glimmering with gratitude. "It's heavy today, and I had no one to help." "It's nothing," Ayadil replied, the words foreign on his lips as he tried to maintain his disguise. "We have to look out for each other in this city." She smiled, and for a moment, the storm around them seemed to soften. The world could rage as it pleased, but there was a quiet pocket of peace in that shared act, a small victory over adversity. Ayadil began to realize that love was not about grand gestures or romantic declarations. It was in the small, everyday act of kindness and courage. It was in the way Amara shared her meager earnings with an old woman who could barely afford a bowl of rice, or how she offered a listening ear to a child who had been abandoned. It was a love that was earned, built slowly on trust and empathy, not bought with gold or glitter. But the city had other plans. Not all eyes that watched the streets were kind. One evening, as Ayadil walked beside Amara, a group of men loitering near a street corner noticed him. They were rough, streetwise, and their laughter carried an undertone of menace. "Hey, beggar," one called. "Where's your money today?" Ayadil froze, knowing that any misstep could draw attention and ruin everything. Amara, however, stood her ground. "Leave him alone," she shouted, her voice firm and commanding. Echoing down the empty alley, the men laughed, approaching her, but there was a fire in her eyes that made them hesitate. In a sudden burst of courage, she lifted a rusted iron rod from the ground. "I said leave him alone." The men muttered curses under their breath, but backed away, leaving her standing tall in the rain, soaked but unbroken. Ayadil watched, astonished and deeply moved. Her bravery was not performative. It was instinctive. She did not flinch in the face of danger, nor did she seek admiration. In that moment, he knew that he had found someone whose courage matched his own, whose heart could not be swayed by fear or threats. Yet, amidst these small victories, life remained harsh. Amara's health began to decline under the strain of long hours in the market, the relentless sun, and the constant labor. Ayadil watched helplessly as she coughed quietly in the night, her body weary but her spirit unbroken. He wanted to reveal his identity, to use his wealth to ease her burdens, but he feared that doing so too soon would taint the purity of their connection. He had to wait, to see if her love, if her kindness, truly sprang from her heart and not from the comfort that wealth could provide. It was during one particularly oppressive day, when the city seemed to shimmer in waves of heat, that Ayadil faced his first moral crisis. A wealthy acquaintance from his world, recognizing him despite the disguise, approached him in secret. "Ayadil," the man whispered, "why are you living like this? You're risking everything. Come back to the life you deserve." Ayadil's heart pounded. He thought of Amara, of her hands offering him yam, of her laughter in the courtyard, of her unwavering spirit. "I am learning something more important than wealth," he replied softly, his eyes scanning the crowded streets for her familiar figure. "I am learning about love, and about people who live without pretense." The man shook his head. "You will be exposed. And if you are, it will ruin everything, not just for you, but for the girl. She will feel betrayed, humiliated. Are you sure this is worth it?" Ayadil's gaze hardened. "I have to know. And if she loves me, she will forgive the deception. If she doesn't, then I need to know now rather than later." Meanwhile, Amara continued to move through her days with the same quiet strength. She began to notice small inconsistencies in the boy she had grown close to. The way he sometimes knew things about the city he should not. The way he spoke with a certain polish despite his supposed upbringing on the streets. But she dismissed these thoughts. In a world where survival demanded attention to small details, she had learned to trust the instincts of her heart. And her heart, despite fleeting doubts, felt warmth, safety, and connection with him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the street lamps flickered to life, Ideal accompanied her to a small shrine near the market. She knelt and whispered prayers to her ancestors, offering a small bundle of millet in gratitude for protection and guidance. He watched her in silence, captivated by the devotion, the humility, and the strength that radiated from her being. "You believe they listen?" he asked quietly, curious, yet careful not to disrupt her ritual. "They do," she said without turning, her voice calm, unwavering. "They have guided me when I was lost, protected me when I was vulnerable, and sometimes they remind us to show kindness to others, even when the world is harsh." Ideal felt a lump in his throat. He realized that in her simple faith, in her acts of humility, she embodied a strength he had never known. Here was a woman whose courage was quiet but profound, whose love for humanity was untainted by greed or fear. And in that moment, he knew that whatever happened, he could not let her go, not for wealth, for status, or even for the ease of his own life. The months passed, and the city's rhythms continued, indifferent yet intimately entwined with their lives. Ideal saw the full spectrum of human existence, the joy of a child's laughter echoing through the alleys, the despair of an elderly woman begging for coins, the anger of a man cheated in the market, the fleeting happiness of a family sharing a meal. Through it all, he remained a shadow unseen, but deeply affected by the truths he witnessed. But life in Lagos is never without complication. One day, a rumor began to circulate through the market about a wealthy businessman's son who had disappeared, rumored to be wandering the streets incognito. Amara, hearing fragments of the tale, felt a strange unease, but her instincts told her not to jump to conclusions. She continued to treat the boy as she always had, with kindness, with care, with an open heart. Ideal, sensing the growing tension, knew that the moment of revelation was approaching. He had seen her acts of pure kindness, felt her unwavering compassion, and experienced the unspoken bond that had grown between them. Yet, he also knew that the truth, when it came, would test the very foundation they had built. Would she forgive him? Would she understand that his deception had been born of love, not malice? It was a question that haunted him every night as he lay beneath the bridge where he had begun his experiment in humility. The city's neon lights glimmered across the water, and the hum of life continued unabated. He realized that love was not merely a feeling, but a test of patience, trust, and courage. And he wondered if Amara, with her indomitable spirit and unwavering heart, could endure the revelation without feeling the sting of betrayal. Yet, even amidst uncertainty, hope burned brightly. Ideal had glimpsed the rarest form of love, not one swayed by material wealth or societal status, but one that thrived in adversity, in honesty, and in the courage to act with kindness. And as he watched her from the shadows, carrying her basket of vegetables, smiling at a child in the street, he felt a certainty deep within. She was the one he would spend the rest of his life with, no matter the obstacles, no matter the risks. The story of Ideal and Amara was far from over. The city would continue to test them. Life would throw trials that demanded every ounce of their courage and compassion. And the truth of his identity loomed like a storm on the horizon. But for now, in the quiet moments of connection, in the simple gestures of shared humanity, love blossomed, pure, unyielding, and profoundly beautiful. The months had folded into one another, a seamless blend of heat and rain, of city noise and quiet moments under mango trees. Ideal had grown accustomed to the rhythm of this double life. By day, a beggar learning the depths of human kindness and cruelty. By night, a young man yearning to reveal himself, to shed a disguise that both protected and imprisoned him. The city, in its relentless energy, became a canvas upon which he could witness the raw, unfiltered aspect of life. And in it, he saw Amara's spirit bloom like a rare flower pushing through concrete cracks. Amara's life had grown intertwined with his. Their routines were now synchronized without conscious effort. She would prepare food in the mornings, distributing small portions to the street children. He would arrive later, offering help and companionship, sometimes sharing small stories of survival that she accepted without suspicion. They laughed together, sometimes cried in quiet corners, and often sat in the fading light of the day, listening to the distant wail of the city, feeling that, in some inexplicable way, the world had narrowed to just the two of them. One afternoon, while Ideal helped her carry baskets of yams to the far side of the market, a sudden commotion erupted. A group of men had begun harassing an elderly woman, trying to snatch her meager bundle of firewood. Without thinking, Amara stepped forward, her voice cutting sharply across the din of the market. "Leave her alone. Don't you dare." The men laughed, their jeers echoing down the narrow street. But the sight of Amara standing firm, her eyes flashing with indignation, caused them to pause. Ideal, heart pounding, grabbed a nearby stick, ready to intervene if needed, but she did not flinch. She stood as though she carried the weight of generations in her resolve, and when the men finally backed off, muttering curses, Ideal realized once more the depth of her courage. It was that same courage, that unbroken spirit, that drew him closer, and yet tormented him with the knowledge that the truth of his identity would eventually pierce the delicate trust they had built. He had begun to see signs, small, almost imperceptible clues, that Amara was sensing something unusual about him. She asked subtle questions about his past, about his family, about places he had supposedly lived. And each time, Ideal skirted the truth, weaving careful stories that blended fragments of reality with fiction. But the guilt weighed heavily, like a stone pressing on his chest. Then came the day that changed everything. Ideal had accompanied Amara to her grandmother's old neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, where she still visited the crumbling compound that had once been her home. As they walked through the narrow alleyways, he noticed familiar faces, neighbors, friends of her family, and some street children who had grown up under her watchful eye. Their smiles and greetings warmed her heart, and for a moment, Ideal felt the weight of his deception even more keenly. A sudden commotion drew their attention to the center of the courtyard. A group of men, rough and imposing, had begun rummaging through old belongings, claiming ownership of the land and threatening eviction. Amara stepped forward, but one of the men grabbed her roughly by the arm. "This is none of your business," he sneered. "Move aside, girl." Ideal's heart leaped. He wanted to reveal himself, to use his strength and status to protect her, but he hesitated. The lesson he had learned from these months was clear. She needed to see herself as capable to assert her own power, even in the face of injustice. With careful words, he whispered, "You can do this. I'm right behind you." She drew herself up, her eyes blazing with determination, and spoke with force that silenced the men temporarily. "I will not allow you to take what belongs to my family. Leave now or face the consequences." Her courage inspired other neighbors to join, creating a human barrier that forced the men to retreat, grumbling but defeated. Ideal watched, filled with admiration, realizing that her strength was both natural and cultivated through years of hardship. The following weeks brought a mix of joy and challenge. The market continued to be a place of struggle, where every day was a test of endurance, every transaction a negotiation of survival. Yet, in quiet moments, Ideal and Amara shared laughter, exchanged glances heavy with unspoken understanding, and leaned on each other in ways that transcended spoken words. He felt a deepening of his affection, an attachment that went beyond desire. It was love, raw and undeniable, forged in adversity. But life's trials were far from over. A wealthy businessman, a friend of Ideal's family who had grown suspicious of his disappearance, began circulating rumors of a young man wandering the streets in disguise. The whispers reached the ears of people in the market, creating an undercurrent of tension. Amara began to notice discrepancies, knowledge he shouldn't have had, mannerisms that seemed out of place for a beggar, a fluency in speech that hinted at a refined upbringing. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, painting the city in hues of orange and purple, she confronted him. "Tell me the truth," she said softly but firmly, her eyes searching his. "Who are you really? Why do you hide behind this?" Ideal felt his heart constrict. The moment he had feared had arrived, and yet He could not bear to break her trust with a lie. He began, faltering, I am not who I appear to be. He lowered his gaze, ashamed of the months of deception. I want to know the truth about love, about people. I want to see if you would care for me, without knowing who I really am. Amara's expression shifted, a mix of shock, hurt, and confusion. All this time, you've been lying? I offered you what little I had, believing you were like me, struggling to survive. And all the while, you were testing me. Ideal reached for her hand, trembling. I never wanted to hurt you. I only wanted to find someone who loved me for me, not for my wealth. And I see now it's you. You're the one I've been searching for, in ways I never understood until now. She pulled her hand away, tears glistening in her eyes. Do you realize what you've done? You've taken my trust, my kindness, and treated it like an experiment. How can I believe anything you say now? Ideal felt a pang of despair. He had risked everything, and now the very thing he sought, a genuine connection, was threatened by his own actions. Yet, he did not falter. I am not asking you to forgive me immediately, he said, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. I only ask that you see my heart, the part that is yours, that has always been yours. Days passed in silence, each one stretching endlessly. Amara kept her distance, the warmth that had once radiated between them replaced by a careful restraint. Ideal continued his presence in the city, still in disguise, still observing her from afar, yearning for a chance to make amends. He watched her face soften when she helped a child, the gentle way she interacted with neighbors, the quiet dignity that never wavered. He realized that love was not just declared. It was earned, nurtured, and restored through patience and humility. Then, a sudden twist of fate brought them back together in an unexpected way. Amara had been invited to a gathering celebrating the success of a local community project, a clinic that provided free care to the poor. As she arrived, Ideal followed, still in disguise, blending into the crowd of children, women, and men who had benefited from her efforts. He saw her speaking to the attendees, smiling, guiding, and inspiring. And in that moment, he understood the full magnitude of her heart, her spirit, and her ability to forgive, not just him, but the world itself, which had dealt her so many hardships. Finally, he decided that concealment had to end. He removed his disguise, revealing his true identity to her in the bustling courtyard, his polished clothes and familiar features unmistakable. Gasps echoed among the crowd as people recognized him. The son of a wealthy tycoon, the man whose disappearance had sparked rumors across the city. Amara stepped back, her eyes wide, her mind racing. Why? She whispered, voice trembling. Why did you deceive me like this? Ideal took her hands, his eyes unwavering. Because I had to know if love could exist beyond wealth, beyond comfort, beyond appearances. And now I know it is you, Amara. It has always been you. Her silence lingered, heavy with the weight of emotions, until slowly a tear rolled down her cheek. You have hurt me, she said softly, but I see your heart, and maybe I can forgive you. In that moment, under the fading sun and the watchful eyes of the city, something shifted. The barrier of mistrust began to crumble, replaced by a fragile but growing hope. The journey had been long, fraught with trials, but it had led to this singular, transformative moment. The acknowledgement that love, when true, could withstand deception, hardship, and the harshest realities of life. The revelation had rippled through the small courtyard, leaving a hush in its wake. Ideal stood before Amara, no longer a beggar but a man of wealth and influence, yet his heart still trembled with the fear of rejection. Around them, the crowd shifted uneasily, whispers of astonishment and admiration blending with the distant calls of the city. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, waiting for Amara's response. Amara's gaze searched his eyes, looking for the truth behind a polished facade. She had always believed in sincerity, in actions that spoke louder than words, and now she faced a choice: to retreat into the safety of distrust or to embrace the fragile hope that love could exist even amidst deception. She stepped closer, her breath steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. I see your heart, Ideal, she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of months of struggle and quiet longing. I see that it has always been true, even if your actions were not. Ideal felt a relief that was almost painful in its intensity. He had feared this moment more than any hardship he had endured in disguise. I promise, he said earnestly, I will never deceive you again. Everything I am with you. And if you allow me, I will spend the rest of my life proving that love can be stronger than fear, stronger than pride, stronger than anything else. Tears welled in Amara's eyes, not of sorrow, but of recognition. Recognition of the bond they had formed, of the trials they had endured, and of the rare and precious truth that they had discovered in each other. Slowly, she reached out, placing her hand in his. The warmth of her touch, the acceptance in her gesture, and the courage it took to forgive began to heal the months of uncertainty and silence. The city around them resumed its rhythm, oblivious to the monumental shift that had occurred in that small courtyard. Street vendors continued to call out their wares. Children darted between baskets of produce, and the scent of fried plantains and roasted corn mingled with the dusty heat of Lagos. But for Ideal and Amara, the world had transformed. It was no longer a place of tests and trials. It was a canvas for a new beginning, painted with trust, respect, and love. In the weeks that followed, Ideal introduced Amara to his family, not as a social experiment or a test, but as the woman he intended to spend his life with. His parents, initially skeptical, were won over by her strength, intelligence, and unyielding kindness. She had endured the streets, faced hardships with grace, and inspired the admiration of everyone who met her. They saw in her a partner worthy not just of wealth, but the heart of their son, and slowly, their resistance melted into acceptance. Amara, for her part, adjusted to a world of privilege with a mix of curiosity and caution. She did not seek to flaunt wealth or power. Instead, she remained grounded, carrying with her the values instilled by her grandmother and the streets she had walked with resilience. She continued to support her community, using the resources now available to create opportunities for children and families who struggled as she once had. She remained humble, yet her impact grew, bridging the gap between worlds that often existed in stark contrast to one another. Life, however, was never entirely without challenge. The city of Lagos, with all its vibrancy and chaos, continued to present obstacles. Amara faced envy and suspicion from those who could not understand her sudden rise in status, while Ideal encountered the pressures of family expectations and business obligations that demanded both attention and diplomacy. Yet, together, they faced these challenges with a partnership forged in adversity. Each decision, each choice, became a testament to their shared values: honesty, compassion, and a willingness to endure for the sake of love. One evening, as the sun set in a brilliant cascade of gold and purple over the city, they walked hand in hand through the market, revisiting the streets where their bond had first formed. Children ran past them, recognizing Amara and waving excitedly, while vendors greeted her warmly, thankful for the support and kindness she continued to provide. Ideal marveled at the transformation, not just in their lives, but in himself. He had set out to test love, to uncover a truth about human connection, and in doing so, he had discovered a depth of emotion, courage, and resilience that no wealth could have revealed on its own. Amara paused beneath the mango tree in the courtyard that had once been her sanctuary. She looked up at the branches that had sheltered her through nights of uncertainty and struggle. "Do you remember when you first came here?" she asked, her voice soft, tinged with nostalgia. "I didn't know who you were, but something about you felt familiar, safe." Ideal smiled, the memory vivid. "I remember. I was afraid, yet I knew I had to see the truth. And the truth was you. It has always been you." He knelt beneath the tree, echoing the posture from the day they had first met, but this time without disguise. He presented a small bundle of cloth, embroidered with traditional patterns from his family's village, a symbol of his commitment, his heritage, and the union of their two worlds. Amara took the bundle, her eyes shining with tears of joy and gratitude. She realized then that love, in its purest form, was not about wealth or status, but about recognition, understanding, and the courage to see another soul. She embraced him, feeling the warmth and security that had eluded her in years past, and for the first time allowed herself to fully surrender to the possibility of happiness. Their love became a story that rippled through the community, a tale of courage, trust, and the transformative power of kindness. It inspired others to look beyond appearances, to value sincerity over pretense, and to cherish the rare connections that endure even the harshest tests. Ideal and Amara, though aware of the challenges that life would continue to present, faced the future together, united by a bond that had been tempered in hardship and affirmed through unwavering devotion. The couple eventually married in a modest ceremony, blending the traditions of Amara's upbringing with the grandeur of Ideal's heritage. The streets of Lagos that had once witnessed their struggles now celebrated their union. Children danced, neighbors rejoiced, and the aroma of spiced meats and sweet pastries filled the air. Yet amidst the celebration, the true essence of the moment was clear. It was not wealth, not status, but love, perseverance, and mutual respect that had brought them to this day. Years later, as they watched the sun set from the terrace of their home, a home that bridged two worlds, they reflected on their journey. The memories of hunger, struggle, and hidden identity were not erased. Instead, they were honored as a foundation upon which their love had been built. They knew that life would continue to bring trials, but the strength of their bond, forged in adversity and guided by compassion, would endure. In the end, Ideal realized that the test of love he had orchestrated was not about deception, but about discovering the truth that lay in the human heart. And Amara, with her unwavering kindness and courage, had shown him the answer. That love, when genuine, is unshakable,